Well, I wanted to do a video. It's been a while and things have been happening, and I've been thinking about this topic for some time. Uh, Life as a tragedy, and how does that relate to the good news that Christians, we Christians, believe in? The war of Putin against Ukraine, or Russia against Ukraine, started basically yesterday. Today is the 25th of February 2022. This is a Virgin that I bought in Mexico many years ago, and it's very similar to the image of the Virgin used in Kiev, uh, if I've been reading right what I have been reading. And the idea that life is a tragedy is something that I learned listening to Gloria Vanderbilt in a tremendous documentary called Nothing Left Unsaid, produced and featuring her son Anderson Cooper. And when this was filmed several years ago, before her death, obviously, which took place a few years ago only, she was already close to 90, or maybe even more than 90, and had gone through so many things. Gloria Vanderbilt came to my attention, like so many other people, in the 80s, I guess, with her jeans, and her smile and kind of a big mouth. And I, took her to be kind of materialistic, superficial person or something. But when I saw Nothing Left Unsaid, and I listened to her, and I saw her artwork, beautiful, beautiful colors, and her depth, and the fact that she had had a difficult life emotionally, uh, having inherited a lot of money, which apparently she lost everything almost, except for what is not a lot of money. Anderson probably makes a lot more money than she left in her estate. Even the genes thing did not result in her being very wealthy at the end, because of various swindles or whatever it was. And among the incredibly interesting and really inspiring things that she says in this documentary, which is available, Nothing Left Unsaid, is her own, recollection of this quote from William Butler Yeats, the great poet. We can only begin to live when we conceive life as tragedy. I think she said something like, when we realize that life is a tragedy is when we can conceive, start to live. And the fact of the matter is that I think what this means is that the sort of maturing that takes place when you realize that, in a sense, the story of the world is a tragic story. You know, we're in the year 2022, almost 2,000 years after the death of Jesus, and very little, if anything, has changed. Some great saints, Francis of Assisi, Catherine of Siena, etc., have left us wonderful examples, as did Jesus. Peter says that so we can walk in his footsteps in his first letter. But nevertheless, we're on the brink. We have war now again in Europe, And as recently as the Nazi period, we had, as I've said so many times, a very educated, smart nation, etc., under perfect storm sort of conditions. The humiliation of World War One, which they were, I think, responsible for, the incredibly bad financial conditions, and then the emergence of this possessed Hitler. And all of a sudden, you have a huge world war when World War One had been considered like, the end. You have to, the League of Nations was to prevent any other world war, and it didn't work out that way. In other words, we don't learn, and I think one of Churchill's quotes is that the main and principal characteristic of the human race is that they are unteachable. And we have people now, I hear, I don't want to get too much into it, Barry Bannon and Pompeo saying Ukraine isn't even a country, and I think Trump called Putin a genius. So you have this incredible manipulation of people, always playing upon and preying upon things that can divide and sort of mobilize in anger, oftentimes, and sometimes in diffusing of anger when it's convenient. So the Capitol assault was really a tourist thing, or at least you cover the invasion of the Central Americans, and now, you know, uh, you line up with Trump in liking Putin or not contesting Putin. Who knows exactly what Trump has with Putin that makes him to not say the truth. Now he's a pathological liar, but with Putin he seems to have a special reticence to challenge him, and they kind of identify with each other, just like even the Mexican president. The strong man thing now is very much in vogue. And speaking of the strong man thing and tragedy, and the topic, which is the world is tragic, what about the gospel, the good news of salvation, etc. I just happened to hear this quote from Hemingway on TV yesterday in a movie, and I wanted to repeat it. If people bring so much courage to this world, the world has to kill them to break them, so of course it kills them. The world breaks every one, and afterwards many are strong at the broken places. And Nietzsche said, what doesn't kill me makes me stronger, but some things can kill you. But those that will not break, it kills. It kills the very good and the very gentle and the very brave impartially. So you have, and I was thinking, and this is one talk that, first of all, I say it for myself. I kind of need to hear what my thoughts are going to come up with in these very trying days. But I was thinking of, for example, Mahatma Gandhi, assassinated at the age of 78. He tried to unify India. He tried to make India independent from Britain, being a colony, exploited, disrespected, etc. But given the fact that were Muslims and Hindus who did not, in many ways and to a great extent, not understand or like each other, the independence brought this partition, this rioting. If you've seen the movie, Gandhi would fast. And Gandhi held this sort of Hindu ecumenical prayer service with Muslims. And this infuriated one of his co-religionaries and countrymen, to the extent that he assassinated the great soul Mahatma Gandhi. And you have, of course, John F. Kennedy. I read, and this is where I got this picture from Hemingway at the very beginning of the book, 1,000 Days by Arthur Schlesinger Jr., a very detailed, first-hand, personally involved account of the 1,000 days of Camelot under Kennedy. And it's a 1,000-page book, so I read a lot about very similar things, the Republicans, the business community, etc. And then the confrontation with Khrushchev over the Cuban missiles, and then the Bay of Pigs before, and all that kind of thing. And Kennedy was really a good man in the FDR sense. There are compartments of everyone's life, maybe including Gandhi, which are not, out in the light or light things, but rather dark things. But the overall impetus of John F. Kennedy was peace, prosperity, civil rights, cooperation, etc. Things that in this other planet we inhabit now with, which are these people manipulated by media that says good is bad and bad is good. This is the exact sin in Mark 3. Jesus casts out demons by the finger of Beelzebub. People who are broken from reality, who follow some manual they've been indoctrinated with, will kill people like Jesus, will crucify them. Today they'll say, no, we are the ones that love Jesus, and will burn a KKK cross in his honor or something to get rid of the blacks or miscegenation or whatever. But back then they would have been the crowd, the throng, the mob, the rabble that would have crucified Jesus. And you have people constantly threatening death to Fauci and to scientists and to abortionists and everything else. And these kind of people have never experienced war, but perhaps they made some sort of rehearsal in the Capitol. Thank God it's not too many of them. But nevertheless, Kennedy was assassinated. Martin Luther King was assassinated, another person perhaps with areas that were not of light, but nevertheless a learned man. I studied precisely in my Gandhi course at Harvard with Diane Eck. We had to, and also with Harvey Cox's course on Jesus and the Moral Life. I read a lot about Martin Luther King and his education. And he was quite a leader, of course, and using pacifistic methods, nonviolent civil disobedience, following Gandhi to a large extent. He was assassinated too, and then Robert Kennedy. When you look at the life of Ethel and the children, etc., and the Catholicism of those families, just like Biden is a Catholic, a real Catholic, you realize that this is all tragic stuff. And I can't help but think that there's another planet that's gonna, if they ever hear this stuff, which I don't think, with my 31 subscribers or something, and the people that watch my videos, which are not too many. I doubt that any of these people watch it, but I can't help but think that if I say the sky is blue, they're going to say the sky is red. If I say Biden is good, he's going to say no, he's an abortionist. Trump is good. So we can't. There can be no dialogue regarding any of that. So their life is the world seems to be a tragic story. And the Bible itself, in the very first chapters, has this line that says that God repented of having created. In Genesis 6, Yahweh, seeing that the evil of man flourished on earth, and that all the thoughts that he had in his heart were absolute evil continuously. Yahweh, Nacham is the verb in Hebrew, he was sorry. He made man on the earth, and his heart became indignant. And Yahweh said, I am going to exterminate from the face of the ground the Adam that I have made. From man to the herds, to the reptiles, and even the birds of the sky, because I am sorry I made them. And he starts again, of course, with Noah, flood. A New Year's Day begins when the flood waters begin to recede. I'm reading a book on biblical chronology. I knew that from before, but we try to have new starts at the new year, etc. And of course, Noah gets drunk. His sons see him naked, Cam, etc. And then you have continuing multiplication of evil, the Tower of Babel. God decides to start with Abraham again, just one people. And of course, the history of Israel, certainly the whole first part up to the book of Kings, is a history of failure, of continual sinning by the kings and the people and the priests and the false prophets, and then the exile to Babylon, then a new start. That's the original good news, is the good news proclaimed by Isaiah, second Isaiah, Isaiah 40, verse 9, proclaimed the glad tidings of return. Isaiah 52, 7, blessed, how happy on the mountains are the feet of those who announce the good news, etc. And then the Spirit of the Lord is upon me in Isaiah 61. He has anointed me to bring the good news to the poor. And Jesus comes for Christians and brings the good news. He sits with sinners, with the outcasts. He's the physician. I was looking at that in my morning prayer today, who tries to bring in the excluded, the broken, those who, resorted to prostitution or maybe even tax collecting. Maybe they were greedy. Maybe something else happened. Maybe they were at fault. But he welcomes these people. He invites himself to Zacchaeus' house, a arch publican, a super, chief publican. And so he does all these good things. He confronts those entrenched powers, religious, especially number one, who are against this sharing of commensality, sharing your table with people that are unclean and or foreigners, maybe even when he has maybe some contact with some foreigners, at a distance, maybe the centurion's servant, etc. And we know what happened to him. He was crucified. He was delivered and crucified. And so the good news then becomes something, I have to say, relegated to the afterlife. And we can try to follow Jesus' footsteps, as I mentioned in the first letter of Peter, which I'm going to read. You have been called for this because Christ also suffered for you, leaving you an example that you follow his footsteps. He didn't commit sin, and in his mouth was found no deceit. The attack on truth to me is the very fundamental break with reality, with morality, with God, with any hope, when you question what is truth. That's what Pilate, the Bible even has these lines. Pilate asks Jesus, what is truth? You have alternative facts. You make up your own truth for your own peace of mind of some kind, like comfort food. You make up your own facts. You believe this, and in Spanish we say caso omiso. We disregard evidence, and we are, continually manipulated with some of the media into this brainwashing thing. We don't even realize it. We're not reflective enough. We don't know enough history. We don't think or study or have enough calm. We have to text while we drive. I saw a picture the other day. I posted it on Facebook. This guy had a hamburger or a Whopper on one hand and the phone on the other driving. That's the kind of people that you can get their whatever they have that may be called a brain, and mold it like God would mold the clay, like a potter the clay. You mold it into anything you want. But the people that are truthful and courageous and get killed, those are the martyrs, the witnesses to the truth. The word martyr is a Greek word which means witness. Martyrion is to give witness, testimony. And that's exactly what the Gospel of John is about. Christ is in a trial. He's being tried by the evil system, and he's giving testimony of God's ways. And the actual result of that will be his execution. So, humanly speaking, Christ is going to fail and be killed. And Christ has to speak then of a post death vindication, which is found in chapter 16 of John. He says, I tell you truly, or amen, amen, I say to you, it is fitting or convenient that I leave, that I go away, because if I don't go away, the Paraclete will not come to you. But if I do go away, I will send him to you. And when he comes, he will convict the world in that regarding sin, and in that which regards righteousness, and in that which regards judgment. In that which regards sin, because they have not believed in me. And so, belief in Jesus, which means obeying Jesus, is the first obligation, and the first sin is not doing that. When he multiplies the bread, fills their bellies, in John 6, they're very interested in him. They want to make him king. So Jesus has gone through all this adulation thing. I give you all the kingdoms and the temptations, and now this is probably a very historical event in the multiplication of the loaves, where they want to make him king by force. It says here in John 6, 15. So they're interested in their bellies, their material advantages. And so now they're interested, and they say, what works should we do? Or what should we do to work the works of God? And Jesus responds, the work of God, singular, is that you believe in the one whom he sent. So that lack of faith, and I don't mean blabbing about, adoration of the Blessed Sacrament or abortion or something. I'm talking about a whole life where you respect others, you love your neighbor, where you are willing to work for the good of the world, repair the world, and you're against war, and you're against lying, and you're against insulting, and against manipulation and brainwashing and firing up people with anger and fake news and having them make death threats and things of that sort. In what is in reference to righteousness, because I am going to the Father and you will see me no more. So I think this would be the righteousness of God raises Jesus from the dead, the vindication, if you will. Jesus and the Victory of God is one of N.T. Wright's volumes. In other words, the Christian faith is that even if they break and assassinate the Martin Luther Kings and the Kennedys, I mean, the Gospel of John says they will kill you and think they are worshiping God. I know that there are people in the other planet that think they are worshiping God when they kill somebody. If you kill, you don't have arguments. Gandhi had to be met with force because the British had no real arguments. So that's one of the litmus tests of who's right. Do you have to silence and kill people because you cannot dialogue to arrive at a truth? You have to wipe out. That is one of the criterion of this. One of the criteria. So that Jesus is vindicated after death. And I want to say something about that. That would be perhaps ultimately the good news that can perhaps be anticipated by living now as if we were citizens of that kingdom. N.T. Wright talks a lot about that in his book on Paul, how we have already been vindicated in Jesus, but we begin to live now as if in accordance with that vindication, that righteousness, and that faith, so that we anticipate something that God will have to do afterwards, because he's not doesn't seem to be doing it now. He's telling us to do it. And right now we feel incredibly weak in our capacity to do this. This is a divided nation, completely down the middle. Some are very angry, and many others are just apathetic, distracted, maybe worn out by the pandemic, etc. I thought the pandemic would be a great wake-up call. It's probably made us worse in many ways. Even I myself acknowledge that I've become maybe even more selfish and less interested in getting together with groups. But these are wake-up calls to take things seriously. And we are incredibly sluggish in doing that. So I wonder what a war would do. A war, then, you really see with the COVID vaccine, you have manipulation saying, with the COVID crisis, you have manipulation saying the vaccine is no good, and now you have people saying Ukraine isn't even a country. Who cares? But if you're really having to fight, or somebody really gets your goat, maybe. I learned that as a child I was bullied. I always say partly my own fault, probably, for sure. I know it was partly I was kind of an obnoxious kid. But I learned to fight back. I learned to fight back. In fact, when you're bullied, you may act out your bullyism, your bullyism you're bullying with innocent people like I did, with my brother, my little brother. And I guess this is all part of the tragedy. I mean, you're very young and you do things, and then things develop a certain way, just like the world. I mean, the world, with evolution, you have, tribes fighting each other, and patriarchy, and you do horrible things to your enemies. Just look at some of the accounts of the Jesuit missionaries in Canada, the tortures they were put through, etc. We haven't improved a lot generally from those evolutionary way pre-Christian ways. And that is the tragedy. So that in reference to sin, or actually judgment, because the prince of this world has been judged. And so we have these words of Jesus in John 16, declaring that evil is already judged. I think it's quite clear Putin is an evil man. He's a poisoner. He's poisoned adversaries. You deny that, Trump would deny that. He aligns with Putin, maybe because they recognize this strong man egomaniac thing. And maybe he just protects his own interests, which could be incredibly dark. Speaking of darkness, in the case of Trump, the darkness is out in the light, but many people, including in the Catholic Church, refuse completely to see it. So what do we make of this? The world is tragic. God repented, but there is this good news, and the good news is the return from exile in Babylon. Then the good news is that final liberation spoken of by the prophets. Swords will be turned into plowshares. The whole earth will be covered with the knowledge of God. The lion becomes a vegetarian, Isaiah 11. The little kid can stick his finger in the viper's nest, and the wolf and the lamb lie together. Beautiful picture. Paradise. No shame walking naked in paradise. God strolling in the afternoon breeze, etc. It's you could say a dream that we have, a desire that we have, that can't come from a Deus ex machina, God sort of dropping in all of a sudden and with a magic wand, but it requires our constant effort to be better, beginning with saying the truth and being able to accept truths even about yourself, starting there. Most people justify themselves. I watch People's Court, Judge Judy. I find it entertaining. And people will defend their position. The lack of humility, the lack of acceptance of objectivity, of fairness, that's a primary indication of moral deficiency or even evil. Somebody tells me you did this wrong, I do have that sort of ingrained in me. I become very pained, and I apologize. I don't believe in covering up things as if denial is a solution. I hate things that are pending and sort of lurking and hidden because I know they come out. There is no secret that will not be revealed. And I think Putin has shown his stripes clearly. Hitler rises up and starts taking, and then England tries to appease Hitler. They don't want to go to war again, and they're not going to worry about this land or that other land, and they attack Poland. If Putin uh, is really intent on restoring the USSR and the Soviet bloc, he could come up with something regarding Poland or Hungary or Czechoslovakia or whatever. And surprises are always there in history, and sudden changes that you thought were down the road or down the pike. So it's a real call to sobriety and a real call to reflection, which I think we are far from. My impression listening to the news here in the United States is that a lot of it is infotainment. When I hear Italian radio, there's a much greater historical sense of urgency and of the imminence of danger because of a war technically in Europe, which their memories are of recent, you know, stamp. So they know what could happen when you have a conqueror, megalomaniac, egomaniac, a KGB unprincipled person, friend of Trump apparently, wanting to do what strong men, cavemen do. They conquer, they take territory, they become kings, they amass property, they get power and glory and all these things, which involves, of course, breaking those who, and I don't know that Hemingway was focused on that, but I would be focused on those who say the truth and demand justice or call for justice. Those are not the powerful ones. Most of the time, they're not the powerful ones. The powerful ones are the ones that do violence and protect themselves against any harm, be it legal or some other harm. They try to save themselves. And sometimes they do so effectively in this worldly sense, which is what we see before our eyes. The community of Sant'Egidio says often Christ was the only one who didn't try to save himself. But we have to have this faith that you can't fight against God. You can't fight against the truth. Gandhi would say truth is God. So that if you want to know what God is about, he's about the truth, which is we live in a common planet where you cannot allow people to be starved or mistreated or lied to or controlled. And you have to be on the right side. And hopefully more and more people are on the right side. I know they're manifesting in various places, including New York. But nevertheless, the cross is always going to be there. And I think that if you want to see an image of Jesus on the cross, it's going to be this kind of Jesus from my novitiate in Mexico with the Dominicans. Majestic, but rather beaten down. And so, with this weak strength, forza debole, that the community of Sant'Egidio oftentimes also refers to, that Gandhi had, the weak strength. It's weak because it doesn't have arms or hatred or resources, but it's strong because it's with the truth. It's with the right side, with righteousness, with justice. And so that the essence of belief in God is that God in the end, and that's what we complain about, that it takes so long. God will provide, but I wish he would provide, while he's waiting to provide, says the Jewish saying. If there is a God who created this creation, even though honestly it says he repented of having done it, if there is a God, we have to believe that he will save us. He will save us at some point. And then we can say with the banquet in Isaiah that God will wipe the tears of all the faces and will remove the shame of his people over the whole earth, because Yahweh has spoken. These are words of comfort. This is part of the book of the comfort. Well, not really. This isn't the late part of Isaiah, the little apocalypse of Isaiah. But it says here, that day by Yom HaHu, on that day, which is the eschatological end day, it will be said, there is your God, behold your God. We hoped that he would save us. This is Yahweh in whom we had hoped, and we rejoice and are glad because of his salvation, because the hand of Yahweh will rest upon this mountain. So it remains a hope, but I think already it's a step forward to align yourself, as I am trying to do, with the right side. When Jesus speaks about sin and righteousness and judgment. We have so many politicians looking for the quick solution, expediency. They betray their principles. They know better. Some of them are even vaccinated. Many of them are vaccinated. They poo-poo the thing for cynical political purposes. No long-term vision. The long-term vision is boring to most people. They want quick solutions to the gas prices or this or that. They judge by appearances, just like Samuel says you should not do when Yahweh chooses David as king. He's the guy that was forgotten in the flocks, etc. The brothers are bigger and this and that. God has a different plan. And being in tune with that plan, which I believe does require meditation, reflection, etc., things that are sadly lacking in our society. With that kind of prayer and reflection and meditation, which Pope Francis engages in very, very seriously, you come up with something that most people don't like: the suffering, the being broken, etc. They want winners, they want popular youth type, and especially bullies and strong people that that make them look up to this source of power, which could be a very false source of power. The weak force of the Gandhis and of Jesus and of Martin Luther King or John Kennedy or Robert Kennedy, etc. That's the one that lives on. If you want to talk about resurrection, it begins with this good memory, unlike Hitler. Now, you can imagine those throngs applauding Hitler, how euphoric all that was. Now, people sometimes don't think about that because most people don't think about history. But if you think of how he had them fooled, this great nation of inventors, philosophers, musicians, everything, and how euphoric they were about a 1,000-year Reich, and how it crumbled, and it took the dexterity of a Roosevelt to mobilize a reluctant nation. I've seen that the Roosevelt's program by Ken Burns, documentary 6-part series, maybe 7-part by Ken Burns. I saw those people marching saying, why not make peace with Hitler? Why don't we, shake hands with Hitler? And Roosevelt had to, with some deviousness, in the good sense, like David had, I guess, in some of his battles or something, he had to move this nation like a real leader to mobilize an arm against Hitler. Nobody wanted to get involved over there overseas. And, people, they weren't, I don't think, as distracted and as weak as many of us seem to be these days, but they did have to fight. They had to fight, just like I learned after being bullied that I needed to fight, and I fought back, and that's stayed with me till this day. I mean, I'm not in condition to fight a real bully that's gonna just clobber me. I remember one time I was a lawyer at the time. I drove my car slowly, as I tend to do, into a gas station, and this brute almost hits me because he's going very fast. I just shook my head. It's a sign of disapproval. I go to the pump to pump my gas. This is a weightlifter. Comes up to me. What did you say? I hadn't said anything. I just shook my head. And I said nothing. I let you go, I said to him. And he walked away. I went back to my office and I told my boss, I said I just had to lower my head before a bully. Jewish boss, not too big himself. And he said, as long as you don't have to lower your head in court. So maybe that's a nice way to wrap this up. There will be a judgment someday. I throw myself at the mercy of the court, I'll tell you that right now. But I think it's good to feel like that rather than to be angry and executing judgment on others with violence. That, if you're on that side, or those are the leaders of your side, or the most visible spokespersons of your side, that they do violence when they don't like a vote or they don't like a race, a young man's race or something, if that's the side that you lean towards, You're probably not watching this video. And on that humorous attempt, I will stop.